Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Zoning Board of Appeals for the Town of Huntington for our meeting of August the 17th, 2023. Please rise for the pledge to our flag.
Next, Mr. Chairman, we have ZBA 23091. This was an application Mr. McCarthy brought for 441 Owner LLC. This is the old Jellyfish. They were in front of us basically for interpretive relief on 2 points, one being whether or not the 7 conditions previously attendant to the prior grant for the Jellyfish, which were all restaurant-related, needed to continue relative to the proposed new use, which, based upon the testimony offered by Mr. McCarthy's clients, was for a dry use only, not a restaurant, either professional space or an office, and apartments on the 2nd and 3rd floor. And they're requesting an interpretation from this board as to whether or not they could remove the 7 conditions which all apply to restaurant use. And the next aspect, which was also interpretive relief, was whether or not relative to the business depth extension, if same could continue. The business depth extension in this instance was specifically to provide some additional spaces for parking, and according to the submissions offered by Mr. McCarthy, the area of the business depth extension is not increasing in size at all, and would also be used for parking purposes. Essentially the same purpose previously offered.
So here's the situation. This one had a public notice that was a little bit misleading to the degree that there was a theory that it was under the special use permit guidelines, which it was not. So the only request, and which is, you know, my terminology is prayer for relief. The only prayer for relief for the applicant was that the covenants and restrictions and requirements that were placed on this property when it was a restaurant, and which had been recorded in the Suffolk County Clerk's office, be removed because it's not going to be a restaurant anymore. So they're basically moot. And for some legal reasons, their request was that this board agree that they be removed. That was their first request. The second request was the extension of business depth, which they have already received and has already been granted by prior zoning board decisions. The issue, which is still, let's say, not totally decided by the court system, is whether or not an extension of business depth runs with the land or runs with the use. My perception is that it runs with the land, but we don't have to make that decision tonight. All we have to do is say that the extension of business depth is for parking and that isn't being used for any other reason. So their request is that it be granted. So I would say that their request is an affirmance that the extension of business depth be continued. And finally, with respect to the fact that because these 2 requests are so de minimis, that the requirement for SECRA doesn't exist, and we would declare it by motion to be what is known as a type 2 action. So is the information that I placed on the record sufficient, Mr. Bennett?
It is, Mr. Chairman, and the relative to the SECRA determination pursuant to 617.5, open parens C, close parens, open parens 37, close parens, relative to interpretive relief, which is essentially all that's being granted here. This has been determined to be a type 2 action, which does not require any additional SECRA evaluation by this board. The applicant, as they move forward through the site plan process, would be applying for to the planning board, which could then conduct whatever inquiry was appropriate when the application was made.
Then the planning board will deal with it in whatever way they deem fit.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion to grant the relief that I had just placed on the record. Mr. Castagna on the motion. Second. Mr. Basso on the second. All in favor? Aye. All right. Any opposed? All right. That application is granted. Next.
Next, we have ZBA 23111. This was an application by Mr. Brown of Mr. Breslin's office for Scott